All right, so last time we met, we started working on some of the pages for folks to be able to register and log in into our application. We had started with the registration page, the login page, and I don't believe we started on the profile page, but we also started on very briefly on what the user admin might look like. So since we don't have any users, none of the other pages make any sense, right? So we first need to be able to create users, right? So let's work first on the registration page, and so this is what we had so far. We had the username, password, and validate password, and so it's a very ugly form. We'll make it look a little prettier in a bit. But it's really not doing anything right now. So if you click on a login, it's even wrong, right? It's not login, it should be register. So let's fix this up and introduce JavaScript to be able to interact with this form. Okay. All right. So let's take a look. We have it here. This is our registration page so far. Let's fix. It is recording, right? Yeah. Let's fix this button so that it says register. And okay, so we have the template, right? So the template is just plain old HTML. There's nothing spectacular about this, but we do want to interact with this page as folks type something in and they submit the form. We need to intercept. We need to handle any events that occur that are handled generated by the user. So how do we do that? We are going to follow the architecture, the model view controller architecture, of which this HTML is the view part of that architecture, right? It's interacting with the user, it's displaying data to the user, it's asking for input from the user, but it itself is not going to handle any of that, right? Instead, there will be a controller, right? In the model view controller architecture, there's a controller that receives all the events generated by the user, and then it decides what to do with that data that's generated by the user. Typically, it would delegate it to someone who knows what to do with it, right? And then it waits patiently for that to happen. And when that's done, the response is then displayed for the user as either successful or any errors or whatnot. So let's work on the controller for the registration component here, right? So let's create a new file. That file will be, notice we're going to follow the same naming convention, right? The feature is that we are working on register, and that the role of this file will be controller, right? So folks already know what this file is all about, right? They already have a mental model where in the architecture does this file belong, right? And what's the role of this file? And also, this is a controller that is executing on the client, on the browser. Right, so it's a controller that it's handling human input, right, as opposed to perhaps a controller on the server that might be handling HTTP requests. Right, so already this tells me a lot about this file, and it's written in JavaScript. All right, so we have this JavaScript file, and let's just do some silly things in here. For instance, what we might just say alert hello from register controller, right? And as you might expect, this just would pop up a small window that says hello from register controller. So how do we tie these together? Well, from the template, we can load that one single JavaScript file using the script element. We can say script, and we can refer to that file we just created, and it's the control. There it is. And the way this works is that the browser parses this script element, fetches the JavaScript file, and any functions, any variables, are immediately executed. Okay. So in this case, it would find this alert, and it would appear. And not until all that happens, it would not continue with the rest of the page. Okay. It's stuck at processing this JavaScript file. All right? That's why perhaps some folks might consider moving this script file all the way to the bottom of the page. Right? If this is a script file that is a huge script file that does quite a few things, we would not want the user to have to wait for the rest of the content to load before it's done with the JavaScript. Right? So you'll see a lot of times that the JavaScripts, instead of being put at the top of the file where they would typically belong, it's put at the bottom of the HTML document. Okay. All right. So let's load the registration page again. So there it is. There's our JavaScript. It says hello from register controller, and then we have our page. Okay. All right. So that's not very interesting. What we'd like to be able to do is interact with this content, right? And we could use just plain old JavaScript to do this. Certainly JavaScript has all you need to be able to interact with the page, and it's done through an object in a global object in the JavaScript language that refers to the document, to the HTML document object model, right? And we can manipulate it, we can read from it. But it's very rare today that folks use plain old JavaScript to interact with the DOM. Instead, they use higher level libraries, right, to interact with them. One particular library that is very common is the jQuery library, right? That solves one big problem that in JavaScript. Okay, the fact that we have not only different versions of JavaScript over the years we have been improving, and new features have been coming into the language per se. But also we have different vendors that compete amongst themselves, right? And each one has a slightly different variation of the language, somewhat competing and perhaps trying to lure some folks to their side of the browser wars. Okay, so it was very difficult for JavaScript developers to write one single JavaScript program, but that it would run equally well on multiple versions of the browser. Us as developers, we can't control what browsers our users are going to be using, right? Unless it's a very small application, maybe for a targeted audience, internal use in your office, maybe, right? And maybe you can demand and make that a particular version of Chrome be used for that, or a particular version of IE be used for that particular application. But typically we don't have that power, right? So what jQuery did is solve a lot of these problems, right? Before jQuery, JavaScript developers would have to write lots and lots of code that would deal with different versions of the language, different versions of the browser, right, depending on where they were running. And you had lots and lots of switch cases, right? If it's IE this version, then do this, right? If I'm running on Safari, then do that, right? If I'm running on some other browser, then do this other thing, right? So it was just a mess, right? So what jQuery did is said, okay, well let's standardize that, right? Let's grab all those switch case statements, right, and put them in one single place, right? And what we'll do is we'll wrap that decision, with an API, that you write to the API, right? And then the API will do the right thing. It will figure out which version of the browser it's in, and then it'll do the right thing for you. And you don't have to bother with that, right? It's all hidden behind this API. Make sense? Right. So it's very rare today that we write directly on JavaScript. Instead, we use these higher level intermediate libraries. Next week we'll go to an even higher library, right? We are humans. We love to create abstraction layers, and just one abstraction layer over on top of the other, and obviously down below we just have zeros and ones, and nobody really cares, right? Anyway, so let's briefly introduce you to jQuery. So you can head over to jQuery.com. I invite you to spend some time perusing through the documentation, the API documentation. We're only going to skim the surface, right? It's very we're just going to look at the veneer, right? Only the very basic things that we need. It's still a widely used library, although obviously it has been supplanted by much higher level abstractions such as React and Angular. But down below, right? Behind all those layers of abstractions, you have jQuery. jQuery is the one who is the workhorse, who actually does the DOM manipulations, right? So if you ever want to see what is Angular actually doing behind the scenes, it's using some form of jQuery to manipulate the low-level DOM. Okay. All right. Anyway, so we want to use the jQuery library. So how do we do that? We need to similarly, just like we loaded our script. Okay, we need to load the jQuery script as well. All right, so let's do that. So how do we do that? So we need to load it. So the way we can is to look for is a jQuery CDN, or a Content Delivery Network. Right. So a CDN is typically it's a repository, a source code repository. Typically these are very well-known repositories that have become popular over the years. Certainly Google is a very popular code delivery, content delivery network, right? But there's quite a few. And what they allow you to do is that you don't host any of these libraries. Instead, you link to these libraries instead of, we could download it and host it ourselves. We could copy the JavaScript file and put it in our, right beside our index file, right? We could put it right here, jQuery.js. We could do that and then link to it locally. Right? Notice that here is a local link to our local file, right? But typically that's a bad idea. It's good to link to your own files, but typically it's a bad idea to link to common files, such as jQuery. So it's such a common library that you typically don't want to host it yourself, right? Unless you have a very explicit, very custom reason to. And so instead we're going to use jQuery's own content delivery network. Here we have different versions of the library. We're going to use this minified jQuery core library. We're just going to copy this, right, and we're going to paste it right here. Okay. So notice that it's being downloaded. This library is being downloaded from elsewhere in the network. And folks might say, well, isn't it more expensive to go out to some other server? What if that server is down, right, or things like that? Well, the only reason of these servers of existing is so that they're always up. Right? That's their only reason of existing. They're more interested in being up than you are being up. Okay, it's their bread and butter, right? Also, because they're typically more popular than you are in your website. Chances are that by the time somebody sees your website, they have already visited this. They might have already visited some other website that is much more popular than you. Okay, and chances are that they've already downloaded this file. Right? If it's already in your audience's browser, okay, chances are that the browser, when it gets to this script element, it says, "Oh, I've already downloaded that. I'm not going to download it again." All right, so it's already cached in their machines. So it's actually faster, right? It's actually faster. It gets to you. It says, "Oh, I already have that file. I'm not going to download it again. I'm not going to bother downloading it. I already have it in the browser, cached in the browser." But this one I've never seen. That I'll download, okay? Because it's probably the first time it got to your website, right? So on average, it's more common that your CDN files will be faster than your own. Anyway, so there we go. So we have jQuery. So to know whether we have jQuery, the only thing that jQuery does is that it declares a single object or function or object. It's the same thing. In JavaScript, functions are treated as objects, right? As first-order objects. You can pass them around just like any parameter. And the object is declared in global space. It's called jQuery. That's the name of the object. Okay. All right. So how do we know if jQuery is declared? Well, I guess we could console log jQuery. Okay, we could console log jQuery. If we run our file again, and we go to console, right? We can load. It does the alert, and notice that it printed something out. See that? It didn't print null. Right? So it looks like the jQuery object has been declared. And yes, it's a function. It's not an object. It's a function, and it takes 2 arguments. Okay. All right. So we have jQuery declared. One of the things that jQuery allows you to do is to manipulate the content. So, for instance, you could do things such as grab content in the page. Let's see. We have this register elements, right? We could from here we could grab that. Grab that element over there. And we can treat it as a function. And if you pass it as an argument, if you pass it a CSS selector, meaning a string here that can refer to elements in the original HTML document, you can then manipulate them, right? So for instance, h1. If I want to grab this h1, I can say h1, meaning grab me the element whose name is h1. And there's only one of them. There could be a whole bunch of them, right? jQuery grabs them all, right? It refers to all of them, right? And that's where the query comes in, the name query, right? Just like on SQL, you do a select statement. So you can say, select all employees from whatever, right? Your query, you're retrieving all the records that meet your criteria, yes? Right? Just like in a database. Same thing here. jQuery is not querying a database. Instead, it's querying the HTML document, right? It's querying the HTML documents and says, retrieve for me, not all the records, retrieve for me all the DOM elements that meet this criteria. Okay, so that's what jQuery is doing, right? It says, okay, retrieve for me all the elements whose name is h1. Yes. Does it matter single quotes or double? It doesn't, as long as you're consistent. And you can embed each one inside. So you can embed double quotes inside of single quotes or vice versa. Okay. All right. So what do I do with this? Well, I could store it in a local variable. Right. They don't have to have the same name. And once I have it, I can now. What a jQuery does is that it generates an object that allows you to manipulate it dynamically. So for instance, one of the things I could do is h1, we could say, we can change the CSS look and feel, right? We can change the color to red, for instance. Okay, so if I refresh, we still have that alert. We should remove that alert. It's annoying. And notice that it has programmatically change the style, the color of that h1. Okay, let me remove that alert. Everybody okay? Right. So that CSS function, right? That was added by jQuery. Right. It got a hold of the DOM element. There it is. We have h1 that represents the DOM element, and DOM elements natively already have an API. Right. It's a very low-level API that allows you to do the same thing. Right, but again, it's might not be identical throughout all vendors across all versions of JavaScript. Yes. So what jQuery does is that it provides a single API called CSS, right? That allows you to consistently treat it, give it a consistent behavior. Everybody okay? All right. You could instead. We could do empty, meaning this says whatever content you have inside of that h1, just remove it. Okay, it's gone, right? Or we can change the internal content of the h1 element, right? So I want to change the HTML content of that h1 element. I want to change it to sign up. Okay. Or I can string these things together, right? I can first do an h1 HTML. I can do h1 change the color to red. Right? I can apply both transformations, or I can string them together. For instance, I can do this. I can string them together like that, right? So for this to work, actually, it's not for free. jQuery wrote its API in such a way that this is possible, right? When we call this function, right, what comes back, the return value of that function, is h1 again, right? So that you can apply another transformation, right? So they wrote it that way to support that feature, okay? Which is very, very, very convenient, right? And it's also it's a very common style of programming in JavaScript, right? It's becoming also very common in other languages as well. But you can imagine that after many transformations, this could go out of the page and be very, very hard to read. So more commonly, you'll see lots of transformations written one per line, right? Everybody okay? Everybody good? All right, so that's silly things that you could do with jQuery. Another thing that you can do is generate content, right? So for instance, notice that our HTML, by definition, this HTML document is ill-formed, right? It's not following the proper HTML document syntax. Okay, notice that we're missing here quite a few elements, right? Notice it's not a proper XML document. It doesn't have a root element. You see that? So it's not a proper XML document. It's also missing the body, the HTML elements, the header. All those are missing. But notice what the browser generated. If you look at the elements, this is what the browser did for us. See that? It parsed our HTML and it fixed it up for us, right? It added the document object, the proper document object model, putting things where they go, where they're supposed to go, right? The HTML element that we never added, the head that we never added, so it's assuming it's empty. There's nothing in it because we never put anything in there. The body, it's assuming that all the content that we're putting in there, my intention was to put that in the body, right? So that's its best guess of what your intentions were. Notice that we programmatically added the style color red. We did that using jQuery. Right? jQuery added that style equal color red. And we programmatically changed the content to sign up. Right? It used to be for a slight second it said register, right? And then a couple milliseconds later it modified it to be sign up. Make sense? Everybody good? All right. So let's add some proper HTML here. So that's HTML. We have here the head. Okay, I would expect that you're doing proper HTML content, and let's put all this register, all this content, in the body, where it should have been. Okay, make sense? Everybody good? All right. Now these scripts, the proper way where they really would go, the correct syntax is that they would be in the head element. Okay, but again, it's very common because we don't want to wait. We don't want to have folks waiting for a page to load to parse the JavaScript and show some content. They often put it at the bottom. Right. Another common thing to put in the head is the title. So this is registration page. So that notice that right now it just says localhost, but if I render it, notice that now it says registration page. See that? So that's the title at the bar. All right, excellent. Let's keep going. So that's a brief introduction to jQuery. Let's actually do something with it. All right, let's do something with it.